Hello and welcome back to Training Tom, the place where I share the lessons I've learned, the challenges I'm currently facing, and the questions I have for my future self. But in today's episode, I want to touch on why I feel like I need to share those things. So let's dive into it. So yes, why do I feel like I want to share the lessons I've learned, the challenges I'm currently facing, and the questions I have for my future self? Well, it all boils down to the why of this podcast. And when I was creating this podcast, when I had this idea, I thought about why I wanted to start it and who I was doing this for. And when I thought about it in more detail, I realised the person that I was doing this for was not just for people that are listening, but it was also for different versions of myself. It was for the adolescent version of myself, you know, the 13, 16, 18-year-old version of myself. It was for the 21-year-old version of myself that had just graduated from university and wasn't really sure what to do with his life. It's also for the future version of myself as well. So it's not just thinking about that past version of myself. It's thinking about the future version of myself. My 30-year-old self, 40-year-old, 50, 60, 70. And if I'm lucky enough to live beyond that, however many years after that, I am as well. And I was kind of breaking it down, and that's where the lessons I've learned comes from and the questions I have for my future self come from. In the lessons I've learned are things that I wish my younger self knew. And maybe at the time I wasn't ready for it, but if I think about the lessons that I've learned and the things I've overcome over the past 10 years even, so I'm 27 now, so from when I was 17 years old, the things that I have learned over the past 10 years, if only I had have known those things sooner, would my life have turned out any differently? Perhaps it wouldn't, perhaps it would have done. But I feel like there are things that I've learned in the past 10 years that would have been particularly useful when I was at school or doing my A-levels. And like I say, perhaps my adolescent version of myself wouldn't have been ready to hear those things, and that's okay. But I look back on the past and think it would have been great for me to have known that information. And I'm sure some of you can relate to that as well. But also thinking about my future self and thinking about the type of person that I want to be in the future, the type of son that I want to be for my parents, the type of brother that I want to be for my sister, the type of friend that I want to be to the mates that I have at the moment, and also the type of friend that I want to be for the people that I meet in the future as well. But even deeper than that, thinking about the type of partner I want to be. Hopefully one day the type of husband that I want to be. And even further than that and beyond that, the type of father that I want to be. And those are some of the questions that I have for my future self. And perhaps I can use this podcast as a platform to share those challenges so that when I look back in X number of years' time, whether that is 2 years' time or whether that is 50 years' time, I can get an understanding of the type of person that I am today, and I can get an understanding of the challenges I am currently facing that have led me to be the person that I will be in the future. And kind of linking back to that younger version of myself, you know, yes, it would have been fantastic for those lessons to have been learned a bit sooner. But a question I have for myself at the moment is, would I be the person I am if I had have learnt those things sooner? And perhaps I wouldn't be. Maybe my life would be completely different. Maybe my life would be exactly the same. Maybe I would have said no to something, or I would have said yes to something else. We never know. And I think this is the this leads me on to another reason why I wanted to start this podcast. It's because nobody is an expert at life. An expert is a phrase that is being bandied around a lot at the moment. If you listen to a lot of podcasts, they often bring on experts in a particular field. And okay, I will hold my hands up and say that person absolutely, categorically knows more about that topic than I do at this moment in time, and probably ever will do. You know, if a podcast host interviews a astrophysicist or a nuclear engineer, they absolutely know far more than me in that particular field. And they are an expert at this moment in time. And I think that's something that we sometimes forget, is that they're an expert at this moment in time. If we look back over the past 10 years even, there are things that have developed. AI has, recently blown up and become this massive thing. And 10 years ago, people might have been very skeptical of whether AI could ever come into society and be part of technology. And it's not until we get to those stages where the technology does become available that we then learn something new, and somebody becomes an expert because they know more than another person. But in 10 years' time, somebody could know more than them. But one thing that is abundantly clear, and that has become very clear over the past couple of years for me, is that nobody is an expert in life. And I'm not saying, I want to categorically say this right now, that I am an expert in life. I'm 27 years old, so there is no way that I can be an expert in life. But one of the things that has struck me is, from reading lots of autobiographies, is that everybody goes about life in different ways. And through reading autobiographies, there are lots of different ways that we can do things. What I'm trying to say is there's no blueprint to live a good life, or if success is the thing that you're striving for, there's no blueprint to live a successful life. But one thing that strikes me with the autobiographies that I read is that they're all written in hindsight. They're all written from somebody that is looking back on a past version of themselves and going, oh, I'm so glad that I experienced X, Y, and Z because it's led to this opportunity, or it's led me to become the person that I am today. And that's great. Like, I think we can learn so much from other people's experiences, from other people's life lessons as well. But one thing that strikes me is that I feel it's very easy for people in positions of influence to say things like, money doesn't make you happy. That's a phrase that constantly circulates the internet. Money doesn't make you happy. But they're often said from people that have a lot of money. And they've gone through that process of striving for money. They've got to the position that they're in, and then they've turned around and said, oh, money doesn't make you happy. You know, I'm in this position, but it's not the money that makes me happy. And perhaps one day I will be in that position where I can say, yep, money doesn't make you happy. But I'm sure there are a lot of people that would be sitting listening to this right now that would go, if somebody gave you £100 right now, or if your manager said we're going to double your salary right now, you would be pretty happy by that. It would open so many doors for you potentially. You'd have much more income, disposable income, or perhaps a little bit more disposable income to do some of the things that you haven't been able to do because money has held you back. And I feel like I'm rambling on about money, and this isn't about money. It's more about coming back to that why of deciding to start a podcast. I want to give people a first-hand view of the challenges that I'm currently going through, so that maybe people can relate to that. You know, I think, again, coming back to those people that share information online at the moment, it's very easy for people to say things in hindsight. You know, I'm so glad that this happened, this terrible thing happened to me. I'm so glad that terrible thing happened to me. But we never hear how they were feeling at that specific moment in time. Again, in an autobiography, they might describe how they were feeling, but again, it's written in hindsight. And one of the things that I want this podcast to be, and the values that I've set myself for this podcast, is to be authentic and to be relatable. And for me, I think that means sharing things as they are happening. You know, this notion of me training myself to navigate through life by sharing the lessons that I've learned, the challenges I'm currently facing, and the questions that I have of my future self. If I was sharing all of this information from a future perspective, if I was just sharing the lessons that I'd learned, then I don't think it would be very relatable. Because maybe you are in that situation at this moment in time, and I'm sharing my perspective from when I was in that situation. But I feel like that judgment or that perspective would be clouded because I'd come through the other side. And in the world that we live in at the moment too, this links with the purpose and why I feel like it's valuable to share the challenges that I'm currently facing, is because in the world that we live in at the moment, we often see the best version of everybody else, especially with social media. You don't see all the time. I will admit it's becoming more prominent on social media, but even so, the main part of social media is for you to share the best bits of your life. It's for you to share that holiday that you've just been on, or that very aesthetic looking meal that you've just eaten with some friends. Or it's for you to, a bit like my Instagram page was, it's for me to share the achievements I've had in exercise and fitness. We don't often hear, or we don't often see, and further than that, we don't often hear the challenges that people are currently experiencing. And if I think about that younger version of myself, to try and bring this back full circle perhaps, if I think about that younger version of myself, it felt very, what's the word that I'm looking for? The younger version of myself felt very insecure. And I think I felt very insecure because of what I could see everybody else was doing, and I was comparing that to my own life. It's very typical. There's a quote that I heard recently, and I can't remember where I heard it from. But we see everybody else's successes and we compare that to our failures. We don't compare that to our own successes. We compare other people's successes to either the position that we're in at the moment, or even further down than that, the failures that we've had. So we're constantly in this negative loop of somebody else is doing better than me, or I can only see how well people are doing and I'm not in that place. And I have to admit, it's been a very challenging thing for me to accept, is that social media does show people's highlight reels. So what I want this to be, bringing it back to those values that I mentioned earlier, when I say I want it to be authentic and I want it to be relatable, I want to share as much as I possibly can about the life that I'm currently living. Because I'm 27 years old, I'm not an expert in life. I'm trying to figure out how the best way to live my life is, just like everybody is throughout their entire life. Like I said earlier, there is no blueprint to live a happy, to live a successful, to live a fulfilling life. We all have to do what we feel is right for us with the resources that we have in the environment that we're in. And I think we often forget that. And what I want to try and do with this podcast is share with you what I'm trying to do with the resources that I have in the environment that I'm in. At this moment in time, I'm recording this episode in my bedroom, in my parents' house. I have friends that have moved out of their parents' home or their family home and have moved into a house with their partner or a flat by themselves. And again, it's very easy for me to compare the stage of life that I'm in with my friends that are in a different position. And I'm going to do a separate episode on that because it brings the phrase comparison is the thief of joy to mind. But I want to do a separate episode on that. But what I want to be is as authentic and relatable as possible. And I want to share how I'm trying to live my life in the best way possible, like I say, with the resources that I have in the environment that I'm in at this moment in time. And as I go through life, I'm sure there'll be things that I learn that right now, this current version of me can't even comprehend yet. It's not even on my radar to learn that thing. And I also want to learn from other people, people that are in a different stage of life to me, or perhaps are in the similar stage of life but have got a different perspective on things. But that's why I want to start this podcast, bringing it back to that original question. Why did I want to start this podcast? What was the purpose of this podcast? It's to create an authentic and relatable space that hopefully people take comfort in listening to, because it's almost going to be an autobiography as it's happening. Rather than writing things in hindsight, I want to share the things that I'm going through as they're happening. Excuse me. Yeah, I want to share the things that I'm going through as they're happening. So that, yes, in the future I can look back and I can perhaps reflect on that experience, but I can also give you an understanding of whether what you're feeling about your current situation is, or give you a different perspective on perhaps how you're feeling of your current situation. We're all trying to, I believe we're all trying to make the most with the situation that we've got. And that will mean different things for different people. I've also come to terms with the fact recently that we are all living life for the first time, which is where that nobody has a blueprint comes from. You're listening to this for the first time. I'm saying these things for the first time. And I think there's a beauty in that, in that nobody has ever lived a complete life, died, then, regardless of your religious beliefs, then come back to life as exactly the same person, with all of the memories that previous person had before dying. There's not one person in the world, again, regardless of your religious beliefs, there's not one person in the world that has lived a life, died, then come back to life years later, decades later, centuries later, as exactly the same person with all of those memories that previous person had. And I really am I'm coming to terms with that, because it then makes you realise why people, or not why people do things, but it makes you realise that we're all trying our best. We're all trying to live life in a way that works for us. And people might disagree with the way that you're living your life. People might disagree with the choices that you make, the opinions that you have, the people that you socialise with. But we're all living life for the first time. And we all make mistakes. Some of those mistakes are amplified by the media. Some of those mistakes might cost other people their lives. Some of those mistakes might be so insignificant, but we're all trying to get through life for the first time, and also for the last time as well. We're never going to be able to live this life again. Like I say, regardless of your religious beliefs, you're never going to be able to live this life again. So we're all trying to make the best of the situation that we're in, with the resources that we have and the environment that we're in as well. And to kind of close off this episode, I want to share the lessons I've learned so that my younger self, or somebody listening to this, can learn potentially from my mistakes and my failures, and can gain a different perspective even. I want to share the challenges that I'm currently facing so that it could be relatable for people, so that it highlights life isn't always simple and life isn't always easy, and that social media might be filled with everybody's success stories, but we all deal with challenges. So I want to share some of those challenges. And I also want to ask questions of my future self, so that when I listen back to these episodes, and perhaps somebody that is in a different stage of life to me can ask those questions of themselves right now, and maybe change their perspective on things, or change the way that they're doing things, or maybe they don't change anything at all, but at least they've just asked the question. But for my future version of myself, so that I can understand why I asked that question at this moment in my life. As I've mentioned in this episode already, I'm 27 years old, I'm not an expert, and I never will be an expert at living life. But I just want to share how I'm trying to live my life in the best way possible. And if people take comfort in that, if people learn something from me, fantastic. If it gives people a different perspective, brilliant. If you listen to this and you're not bothered by some of the things that I'm sharing, then that's okay. Because it's as much for me as it is for you. Yeah. It's as much for me as it is for you. I really do hope people find value in these episodes, but I also hope that I find value in them as well. I think that's a good place to finish. Hopefully you have found that episode valuable. The promise that I will make to all of you is that I will be as authentic and relatable as possible. If I'm not, please tell me, and I can bring it back to the roots or the values of this podcast. But for now, thank you for listening. My name is Tom Regan, and this is the Training Tom podcast.